The person I secretly admired went blind. I pretended to be his fiancé and took care of him for a year. When the real fiancé returned, I was kicked out of the villa. I worked overseas alone, unaware that he was going crazy looking for me back home. Alan, it's time to take your medicine. I lowered my voice, walked into the bedroom with a glass of water in hand. The man sitting on the edge of the bed turned his head, the setting sun casting a golden edge on his handsome face. However, his eyes showed no focus. "Why did you come so late?" "Half an hour delay," Alan scolded, but smiled gently in my direction. The company had some last-minute issues. I imitated Kathy's tone and placed the water glass in his hand. "Alan is my husband, and I am playing the role of his young lover." A year ago, Alan was temporarily blinded in a car accident, and the recovery time was unknown. His fiancée, Kathy, arrogant and unwilling to marry a blind man, fled abroad. My younger brother had a sudden heart attack and urgently needed surgery, with hefty medical bills weighing on me. The Booths were secretly looking for someone, needing a voice actress who closely matched Kathy in all aspects to impersonate her. And I was the best candidate. I excelled in vocal music, and we quickly reached an agreement. "Kathy, what do you want to eat tonight?" Alan played with my fingers with a smile. He worked from home every day, only relaxing when I got off work. "Auntie made your favorite dish, I'll bring it to you in a while." "Okay," Alan massaged my neck, leaning in for a kiss. My face felt warm. Unable to push him away, but rather being held down by him. My heart raced, even though I had experienced this situation many times. But every time was nerve-wracking because I was afraid of accidentally exposing myself. Alan's hand moved to my waist, resting on my stomach, looking puzzled. "It's been so long, why is there still no movement?" "It depends on fate, and I've been working hard lately." "I probably need to take care of my body," I lied, knowing he couldn't see my micro-expressions. It was just an agreement between us, and I always took my medication on time. "Looks like I have to make an effort." Alan laughed, nibbling my ear. Seeing that he wanted to continue, I immediately pushed him away, saying, "I'll go check if dinner is ready." His light laughter echoed behind me as I blushed and my heart beat faster against the corridor wall. Thinking of his tenderness, everything he did was for his fiancée, I felt like a bucket of cold water was being poured on me. This man was gentle, wise, and well-mannered, making it hard not to be moved by him. Moreover, I had liked him for a long time. Going downstairs, Alan's mother was waiting for me at the dining table. "I have good news to tell you. Kathy has been found, and doctor said there are signs of Alan's eyesight recovering. Soon you can leave once everything is settled." Alan's mom smiled, clearly genuinely happy. I forced a smile and said, "Congratulations, it's finally over." Alan's mom saw the kiss mark on my neck and immediately turned cold. "Ivy, don't cause any trouble. If you expose your identity during this final period, or try anything else, you won't get a single penny for your brother's follow-up treatment," she warned coldly. I nodded coldly, ignoring her disdainful gaze. Privately, Alan's mom didn't allow me to call her mother. In her heart, I was always a poor imitation. It was my blessing to be touched by her son's fingers. The one truly worthy of Alan was someone from a noble family like Kathy. If she hadn't been reluctant to lose face on the engagement day, she would never have let someone like me, a poor woman, step into the Booths' lives. On the engagement day, she had me wear a veil over my face, just going through the motions. After dinner, I brought a glass of milk to Alan. Walking into the bedroom, he was on the phone with his assistant, hearing the report on the company's situation. I sat aside, my heart pounding, repeating the prepared script in my head. Alan hung up the phone, reaching out to hold my hand. "Tomorrow is the weekend, want to go out for fun?" "But I have to go back home tomorrow." He held my fingertips and said, "Then I'll wait for you." I felt melancholy as the agreement would end the next day, and tonight would be our final night together. "Alan, drink the milk and rest early," I placed the glass in his hand. After Alan finished, a milk stain remained on his lips. I raised my hand to wipe it away, and our fingers brushed against each other. Suddenly, he pinched my hand gently. His long fingers traced the back of my hand as if searching for something. In a flash, his fingertips paused, locking onto my eyes with a knowing smile. It's really you. I averted my gaze guiltily, forcefully pulling away and trying to act calm. You've mistaken me, monsieur. Is that so? Why are you so nervous then? He asked, excited and annoyed. I awkwardly looked at the floor, relieved when his partner urgently called him over. Seizing the opportunity, I slipped away. I was terrified of what Alan would do if he found out that the kindness he showed during that time was directed at a stranger. Next morning, I resigned from the restaurant. The manager, who was usually indifferent, suddenly became very warm, offering to double my salary. It was clearly suspicious. Is Alan looking for me? I refused the manager's retention and took a leave of absence from the training institution. I stayed home for a few days. After confirming that Alan didn't look for me again, I dared to go out. I went to the supermarket to buy groceries, planning to cook soup for David when I got home. My younger brother just turned 17 and needs to recover soon to prepare for his exams. When I went upstairs, there was a tall figure standing in front of the door. Dressed in expensive casual clothes, which looked out of place in this old neighborhood. Alan stared at me, with a hint of anger in his eyes. Ivy, I finally found you, he called out my name, each word spoken with some gritted teeth. I stood still, pretending to look calm as I faced him. Why are you looking for me? I don't know you. Don't know me? He sneered, walking towards me with cold eyes. A huge sense of oppression struck. I took a step back, being cornered against the wall by him. Suddenly, he reached out and grabbed the back of my neck, leaning in as if to kiss me. Startled, I turned my head aside, about to scream. He covered my mouth. Explain to me your panicked reaction and why you smell like my wife. How long are you going to pretend? He said, his nose touching my neck. The ambiguous distance made me feel both ashamed and outraged. Alan, let go of me. Why? Suddenly you remember me. He raised an eyebrow, looking amused. Panicked and confused, I didn't dare to look at him. Alan released his grip on me and straightened my disheveled collar. Stop avoiding me, I just want to talk to you. I nodded helplessly. I had thought of taking him to a nearby cafe to talk. But he insisted on talking at my house. Unable to refuse, I reluctantly opened the door. Hearing the noise, David walked over. He was wearing casual clothes, with a pale face, but smiled at me. You're finally back, will you make soup tonight? Seeing the person behind me, his expression changed. Alan confronted him, and the atmosphere tensed up instantly. David grabbed my sleeve. Sister, who is this? Sister? Alan sneered, becoming more irritated. Do you like them younger? I glared at him, but before I could speak, David sensed something was wrong in his words and grabbed his collar. What nonsense are you saying? If you insult my sister, I'll beat you. Let's just see about that. Alan with a cold face, almost rolling up his sleeves. I had never seen him so impulsive and childish, quickly intervening to separate them. Stop it. He's my brother, by blood. There was a brief moment of silence. Alan quickly regained his composure, extending a professional smile, shaking David's hand. So he's your brother, my mistake, misunderstandings happened. Who are you? Don't go around claiming relatives. I'm not claiming, I'm your brother-in-law. I sent David back to his room and sat down on the couch with Alan to talk. He glanced around the room, listening to me recount the events that had occurred. So, you took care of me because of the money? Yes. And fulfilling the duties of a wife wasn't voluntary? No. I felt embarrassed bringing up this topic. After all, he had mistaken me for Kathy. He looked at me deeply, as if contemplating something. I was afraid that if he got angry, he might harm my brother. After all, I had signed the agreement because of my brother's illness. Mr. Allen, I'm sorry, I deceived you. If you're angry, I couldn't think of any way to compensate him. Alan laughed at my distressed expression. I'm quite upset that you avoided me. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door. I went to open it and found my neighbor from next door, Peter. He was an interior designer, and we looked after each other. Ivy, a colleague, sent me a lot of crabs today. I remember you said you wanted to eat them the last time we spoke, so I brought them over for you. Peter handed me a box with a smile. It was just a casual mention, I didn't expect him to remember. Thank you. Don't be so polite with me, let me know if you need anything else in the future. He was very warm, taking a glance around the living room. Oh. You have a guest here, I won't disturb you then, I'll call you when the food is ready. Peter and I often had meals together. Sometimes when I was working late at the institution, David would have dinner with him. The politeness between us had developed into a good friendship. After closing the door, Alan was staring intently at me. I felt uncomfortable with his gaze since his eyesight had returned. Mr. Allen, it's getting late, I've said everything I needed to. If possible, let's forget about the past. I clenched the hem of my clothes, feeling a bit sour. Deep down, I was scared of him causing trouble for me, yet also afraid of not seeing him again. Alan frowned, somewhat displeased. Forget? You wish. What do you mean? This time, when he came to find me, he stared at the box of crabs and shifted his tone. I have something to ask for your help. I looked at him puzzled. What can I do for you? Kathy has run away again, and I need to find someone like her to marry. My heart skipped a beat, it felt like being pricked by a needle. Another stand-in. Exactly, that's all I am good for. Mr. Allen, this time I can't agree. Why not? I can give you money, or anything you want. It's not about money, I just want to live my own life. I had had enough of the hardships from that year, I didn't want to go down that road again. Alan wasn't in a hurry, he got up leisurely. It's okay, answer me when you've thought it over. I thought I would decisively refuse this deal. But David's condition worsened. When I took him to the hospital, I was scared to death. The doctor said he needed to be hospitalized for observation and further decision on whether to perform surgery. It was going to be another huge expense. I looked at the balance in my phone with a sigh. Somehow, Alan received news and visited David in the hospital. He said he could help me place my brother in a better hospital for treatment. Besides, David was not from here, and if he wanted to take the exams, he would have to go back soon. I weighed my options. In the end, I had to bow down to reality. Sitting on the plane with Alan, I felt like I was in a dream. I was going to marry the man I liked. Even though it was under someone else's name. Alan reached out and held my hand, habitually touching my fingertips. If you're tired, rest a bit, your dark circles are quite heavy, you haven't been resting well these days, right? I tried to pull my hand away, but he held it firmly. I looked at him puzzled. I'm not Kathy, why are you so concerned about me? You're about to become my wife, can't I enter the situation a bit early? He said it as if it was his due, and then wanted me to lean on his shoulder. After being busy at the hospital with David, I was indeed tired. The familiar woody scent enveloped me. I actually fell asleep. Upon returning to the country, Alan kept his promise and transferred David to the best private hospital. He also arranged for a tutor to help him with studies. Meanwhile, I was surrounded by a group of designers every day. Trying on makeup, choosing hairstyles, selecting wedding venues. It was strange, I didn't see Mrs. Booth this time. Shouldn't she have said something sarcastic since I was going to marry her son? I lived in an apartment near Alan's company, he said it was convenient for taking care of things. When he returned from work at night, he looked exhausted. I showed him the wedding venue design. Afraid that my taste might be different from his, and that all the guests would be celebrities, I thought he'd know best. He glanced at it and nodded in agreement. I'll go with your choice. If it isn't right and people criticize, don't blame me. Our wedding, of course, should be to your satisfaction. What does it matter to others? Alan loosened his tie. Dear, I'm hungry. Why are you calling me that? We're not married yet. And that title should be for Kathy. So what should I call you? He pondered for a moment. Ivy? Saying my name from his mouth, it sounded exceptionally beautiful. My face flushed, and I pushed him away, heading to the kitchen. I cooked a bowl of noodles for him and then retreated to my room. When I came back, we both slept separately. But tonight, as I was about to sleep, he knocked on the door. Ivy, the air conditioning in my room is broken. In the middle of summer, that's torturous. I opened the door, and he was holding a pillow, looking at me, hair falling down, appearing somewhat pitiful. So are you sleeping on the floor? The master bedroom bed is so big, it's a waste to sleep on the floor. He walked in and naturally lay down on the bed. I watched him and suddenly felt uncomfortable all over. Come to bed, what, are you shy? He raised an eyebrow at me. Haven't we slept together before? It's different. What's different? When he was blind, I dared to change clothes in front of him. Now that he could see, everything had changed. I awkwardly walked over and slept on the edge of the bed. After turning off the lights, I felt too anxious to fall asleep. He always liked to tease me before bed. After a while, I heard his even breathing from behind. I relaxed a bit, yet felt a twinge of loneliness. Indeed, I'm not Kathy. I no longer have any attraction to him. Early the next morning, I woke up in his arms. I glanced at him awkwardly as he was still asleep. I didn't even understand how I ended up there last night. I quietly slipped out of his embrace and left after tidying up. Peter returned to his country that day, and I went to welcome him back. He was especially delighted to see me and even brought me a gift. I remembered he liked spicy food, so I took him to a famous hot pot restaurant. Weren't you planning to develop over there for the long term? Why did you decide to come back? Took on a big project, so I was away for a while. Peter kindly recommended dishes I liked. We caught up on each other's recent events. I didn't mention the reason for my return to the country. It's embarrassing to talk about a stand-in exchange. Happy to see a familiar face, I had 2 glasses of wine with him. As the night fell, Peter was worried about me being alone and insisted on driving me back. When we reached downstairs, he patted my shoulder. Even though you didn't drink much, have some honey water when you get back, so you won't feel uncomfortable tomorrow. All right, thank you. As the taxi left, I looked at the apartment in front of me and sighed. Every time I get involved with Alan, I can't escape from Kathy. Suddenly, I felt pitiful. Suddenly, a figure rushed out of the hallway. Alan, looking disheveled, hurriedly walked towards the car. Just as he opened the car door and saw me, he closed it angrily and walked towards me. Even from a distance, I could feel his anger. Instinctively, I tried to step back, but he grabbed me. Where did you go? Do you know how many calls I made to you? Alan furrowed his brow, and his grip on me hurt. My phone was on silent. I just had dinner with a friend. Which friend? Peter, the one you've met. Why didn't you tell me? Do you know how worried I was? He suddenly stopped, took a deep breath to calm himself down. I knew he was probably worried that I had left and couldn't find a replacement bride, causing him trouble. I lowered my eyes and struggled. I understand. I'll tell you next time, but please let go of me for now. Alan didn't release his grip and insisted on taking me upstairs. When we entered the door, I coldly tried to go back to my room, but he wouldn't let me. You went out early in the morning, had fun with him all day. You seemed happy, didn't you? What did you talk about? What's it to you? I'm your fiancé, aren't I? He gritted his teeth. Perhaps emboldened by the alcohol, he accused me angrily. It's all fake anyway. I tried to walk around him and go back to rest in my room. He suddenly reached out and pushed me against the wall. Why do you get irritable as soon as you see him? Alan stared at me, his eyes full of annoyance. I didn't understand why he cared so much when I was not Kathy. I had no more self-respect and didn't want to lose my freedom. I struggled, but he held me tighter, constraining me in his arms. Alan. I find you so annoying. Annoying? He squinted, sneered, then I don't mind making you even more annoyed. He lowered his head and harshly bit my lips, not gentle at all, almost intentionally trying to hurt me. Tears welled up in my eyes, but he didn't let go. Only when he saw me struggling to breathe did he finally release me. No more drinking with other men in the future. Otherwise, it won't be so simple next time. After that day, I had a cold war with Alan. Although he apologized the next day, I was still angry. Just because I wasn't Kathy, did he have to treat me like this? I would report everything I did to him, but at home, I wouldn't say a word to him. On Saturday, I went to the hospital to visit David. The hospital lobby was crowded and noisy. Just as I was about to enter the elevator, I caught a familiar figure in the corner of my eye. Upon closer look, I realized it was Kathy. I followed her and saw her heading towards the gynecology department. I waited outside for a while. She came out with a pale face holding a lab report and 2 boxes of folic acid. Was she pregnant? I stood there stunned, not knowing how to feel. Grateful, yet uncomfortable if Alan found out. In any case, I, as a stand-in, would eventually have to leave stage. Adjusting my emotions, I approached her and grabbed her arm. Kathy, Alan has been looking for you. She paused, looking puzzled, and gave me a once-over. You're Ivy? Yes, you know me? Oh, that guy managed to find you. Kathy smiled, leaving me stunned. Her reaction was entirely different from what I had expected. Kathy. Wasn't Alan going to marry you? He said you ran away, so why are you here? What? He's spouting nonsense? Kathy replied with an irritated, furrowed brow. Her phone lit up, and her expression turned even angrier. Let him explain it to you himself. I have to go beat someone up today, goodbye. Kathy walked off in high heels, leaving in a hurry. As if remembering something, she suddenly turned back. Oh, and the child isn't Alan's, in case you misunderstood. I stood there foolishly, my mind a mess. What was going on? If Kathy hadn't run away, why did Alan deceive me into coming back? Returning home, Alan had finished his social engagements and was resting on the sofa, a faint scent of alcohol lingering around him. Anger surged within me, and I threw my bag at him. Alan! He instinctively caught the bag, looking at me confusedly. What's this? Finally willing to talk to me, you deceiver. I grabbed his collar. Kathy didn't run away at all. Did you deliberately deceive me? I seethed. Saying we were getting married, making myself slim like Kathy just to match her body shape. Alan burst into laughter and embraced me. Yes, I deceived you. I froze, surprised by his unabashed admission. You scoundrel. His head buried in my shoulder, he muttered, I am a scoundrel, now we're even. What? You deceived me before as well. You said you'd be back later, but left and never returned. His voice sounded somewhat hoarse, as if filled with grievances. I stood there, releasing his collar. His tight embrace made it hard to catch my breath. Alan, let me go. Releasing his grasp, he asked, where do you want to go? Approaching me, he bit my neck with intoxication. It seemed as though he was determined to leave a mark, biting down a bit too hard. Are you crazy? I exclaimed, trying to push him away, but couldn't. When a red mark was left, he finally relaxed his bite, satisfied. I am crazy. Ivy, you have no idea how long I've been looking for you. I didn't know your name, what you looked like, I knew nothing. I searched, and you were hiding so far away. Overwhelmed by his confession, my mind was in a daze, staring at him dumbfounded. Why were you looking for me? Because I like you. His sincerity caught me off guard. But I impersonated Kathy, you. She has nothing to do with it. I never liked her, she didn't want to marry me. From the beginning, I knew you weren't Kathy. I froze again, feeling a weight lifted off my chest. The guilt dissipated, and the youthful flutter suddenly found a response. It was as though I had discovered a hidden treasure, making me incredibly excited. Tears welled up in my eyes. How did you find out? You fool, years of playing instruments left calluses on your hands. Kathy wouldn't have the patience for that. He caressed my hair, and she wouldn't be as caring and attentive as you are. I no longer want to hide my feelings for you. I felt my cheeks flush, overwhelmed. He said that sometimes he thought about revealing my identity and confessing directly to me. But he wanted to wait until my eyes recovered, to surprise me. Unfortunately, the surprise never happened, and I left. After confessing everything, Alan held on to me and wouldn't let go. I could barely speak, tears streaming down my face. I had never imagined that his tenderness was just for me. Alan's eyes welled up, wiping away my tears. Ivy, have you cried enough? Not yet. Then tell me, do you love me? I shyly lowered my gaze. The unspoken love had reached its conclusion, making it difficult to articulate. He was patient but gently asked, then let me ask another question. Are you willingly going to fulfill your marital duties with me? Yes. If I didn't like him, I wouldn't have been so absurd. Alan chuckled, lifting my chin. You look so red. It's too hot, I'll go take a shower. His gaze made me flustered, so I hurriedly slipped away. As I entered the room, he followed, blocking the door. What are you doing? I asked, startled. Taking a shower with you. Have you no shame? No, I want my wife. Approaching me, he kissed me with an intoxicated fervor. By him, I was pressed against the wardrobe. As he kissed me, he murmured, "I've thought countless times about what you'd look like. I'd secretly touch your face in the middle of the night, and now I finally get to see you. Ivy, you're so cute, I like you a lot." My cheeks turned crimson, unable to escape his attention. Eventually, he carried me into the bathroom. After revealing our true selves to each other, life no longer felt as strained. Still, I avoided Alan every day, pretending to be busy with wedding preparations. Because every night, he scrutinized me so closely that it made me blush. It was indeed time to marry Alan, so I had to consider Mrs. Booth's side. Although Mrs. Booth was harsh, she never mistreated me. Not wanting to trouble Alan, I sought Kathy's help. When I found her, she was having an argument with a man. More accurately, she was angering him one way. The man, who seemed like a bodyguard, dressed in a suit. Kathy glared at him, exasperated. "How could you only come back now? Do you know how scared I was? You blockhead, get out." I rolled my eyes at you, and you would secretly cry. "I was wrong, don't be mad. It's not good for the baby." The man held her hand, but she pulled away. The two of them went back and forth. In the end, the man hugged her for a long time. They kissed for as long as I watched from the side. When Kathy was in a better mood, I dared to approach her. When she saw me, she instantly brightened up. "Do you still need anything from me? Is Alan not satisfying you anymore?" Kathy said with a hint of disdain. It was clear that their friendship was genuine. She mentioned that Alan had moved out of the old house because he was looking for me and had a big argument with his mother. I stood there, realizing that he hadn't mentioned any of this to me. I felt like I needed to do something to ease the tension in their relationship. "Kathy, I want to ask about Alan's mom's preferences," I said sincerely to her. Since she grew up with them, Kathy must know Mrs. Booth's likes and dislikes very well. She understood instantly. "You want to win her over, huh?" "That's simple," Kathy agreed readily. Her reason was that if I married Alan, then she wouldn't be forced into marriage herself. We made a deal, and she told me about Mrs. Booth's preferences. Mrs. Booth was actually a tough one with a soft heart. Jewelry was secondary to her, what she wanted most was a grandson. "Ivy, why don't you pretend to be pregnant? It's sure to work. That way, you can get married to him sooner, and I can be free sooner," Kathy suggested enthusiastically. Holding my hand, I went back to discuss with Alan, and he agreed. So, on Sunday, Alan took me back to the old house for dinner, and Kathy was there too. As soon as we entered, the atmosphere tensed up. Mrs. Booth pretended not to see us and kept talking to Kathy. I was used to this behavior of hers, so I didn't mind much. Alan held my hand firmly, making a statement. "Mom, I'm going to marry Ivy. This is not up for discussion," he said firmly. Mrs. Booth was taken aback, and the cup in her hand slipped and shattered on the floor. She glared at me angrily, pointing at us as if she was about to scold us. Kathy quickly intervened and explained, "Auntie, don't be mad. Ivy is pregnant, so Alan is in a rush to get married." "Pregnant? How is that possible?" Mrs. Booth widened her eyes, even more angry now. "Ivy, how dare you? I've explicitly told you," she said. "Mom, don't talk to her like that." Alan intervened, defending me. "Are you siding with her?" Mrs. Booth was furious and seemed like she wanted to scold us both. Kathy took out a pregnancy test report she had prepared in advance. She had just replaced her name with mine. "Auntie, look, it's been 2 months." Mrs. Booth looked at the paper with a pale face, her hands trembling. Her eyes filled with anger swept over me, and I lowered my gaze, feeling slightly guilty. "Auntie, don't be so upset. We went to the temple to see, and this child is blessed, and it's likely to be a boy. You wouldn't want the Fu family's first grandchild to grow up outside, would you?" "That would sound bad if it got out," Kathy kept persuading, targeting her soft spot. Mrs. Booth calmed down and looked at my belly. The living room fell silent. After a long silence, she sighed and told the butler. "Set an extra place for dinner." I thought the road ahead would be very difficult, but a week later, the old house kept sending supplements to the apartment. Mrs. Booth didn't say much on the surface, but she had started to accept my presence. I breathed a sigh of relief. I ended up making Alan eat those supplements. As a result, he was even more active at night. On Friday, Peter asked me out for dinner. He had a friend who wanted to start a music institution, which he thought would be a good fit for me. I had always thought about starting my own music training institute a long time ago, but had put it on hold because of David's illness. Now, it was the right time to rekindle that dream. Even though Alan said he didn't mind supporting me, I still wanted to strive for independence. After all, marriage and independence are two different things. I enthusiastically started planning the Music Training Institute with my partner, starting with tutoring children. Every day, when Alan came back and saw me busier than him, he would quietly help me out. He would look over contracts and advise me on investment matters. After he showered, I was still working on my computer, looking through documents. There was so much preparation to be done, but I didn't feel tired at all because I was finally doing what I loved. Wife, when will you make time for me? He came over pitifully. If I ignored him, he would start bothering me by touching my ears, biting my neck. I couldn't avoid the ticklish feeling. After finishing the last task, Alan sat next to me, reading a book. I stretched lazily. All right, time to rest. He ignored me. Are you mad? I took his book away and saw his resentful eyes. I laughed and delivered that line. I am working hard for our future. Don't give me a hard time. He raised an eyebrow. I am giving you a hard time, so what? Of course, I am trying to make you happy. I leaned in and kissed him. Alan's gaze turned deeper, looking at me meaningfully. He patted his leg. If you want to make up, come here and make it up to me. The next day at noon, I woke up. Feeling sore and achy, I struggled to get up and sent the prepared materials to the partners for review. Alan looked refreshed, reading a book in the living room. When he saw me, he smiled. Darling, I was very satisfied with your efforts to make up yesterday. Today is Sunday, rare for the two of us to have free time. Alan suggested going out for a date, to experience the daily life of a young couple. Before we could leave, Mrs. Booth arrived. When I opened the door, I almost couldn't believe my eyes. The housekeeper behind her was carrying bags of all sizes. What are you standing there for, not letting me in? Mrs. Booth said coldly, and I quickly stepped aside. Alan greeted her, but Mrs. Booth was dismissive. I poured her a cup of coffee. When I bent over, Mrs. Booth glanced at me, and her expression immediately changed. Since you're pregnant, be careful not to harm my grandson, okay? I awkwardly touched my neck and quickly pulled up my collar. Blame Alan, he bit me so hard yesterday. Alan hugged my shoulders and changed the subject. Mom. Do you have something to tell us? Can't you visit without a reason? Mrs. Booth gave him a cold look, pointing at the supplements. These are all sent by your grandfather. Remember to take them. Thank you, Mom. Mrs. Booth glanced at me, furrowing her brows. Didn't I send you nutritional supplements? Why do you look thinner? Before I could react, Alan quickly explained. She has been having severe morning sickness recently, unable to eat anything. Mrs. Booth nodded, showing concern, but every sentence was about the child. After having lunch together, it was time to send her off. Suddenly, Mrs. Booth suggested taking me to the family estate for pregnancy care, and she even prepared a nutritionist to take care of me. I was shocked, and Alan's face changed immediately. No way. Mrs. Booth frowned. Why are you so anxious? I want to witness the whole process of my child growing up, and now, it's about scientific pregnancy care, not just eating more. Mom, don't worry, I will take care of her. Unable to persuade Alan, Mrs. Booth had to give up. Before leaving, she said meaningfully to us, take care of yourselves. Peter was still busy with the project. Knowing that I was getting married, he seemed a bit down. Recently, he couldn't help but complain to me about how difficult it was to deal with that partner. The design drawings kept changing, and in the end, they said the first version was better. Yesterday, I informed him to add a children's playroom. If it weren't for the money, he would have given up long ago. I stifled a laugh and encouraged him. On the weekend, I made plans to go shopping with Kathy. She was visibly pregnant, and I wanted to accompany her to shop for baby products. As I was about to leave, Alan rushed out of his study. Darling, where are you going? Didn't you say you were going shopping with Kathy? Where are you going, and when will you be back? He clung to me, bombarding me with questions. Every time I went out, he would make sure of the time and place. I answered each question, and he kissed my cheek. Be sure to come back. If anything happens, call me. Okay. Goodbye, darling. He watched me enter the elevator at the door, looking as obedient as a puppy. If his employees saw this, they would probably be shocked that when we arrived at the mall, Kathy was already there. As we shopped, she complained about her fiancé's old-fashioned way of proposing. But looking at the small diamond ring on her hand, she clearly appeared very happy. Passing by a men's clothing store, I decided to go in and buy a tie for Alan. Kathy was watching me with a smirk on her face. "It's obvious that you really like Alan," she teased. "I remember we went to the same high school. Have you liked him for a long time?" Feeling a bit flustered, I changed the subject and asked, "Which of these two ties do you think looks better?" She pursed her lips, seeming to know something. "The one on the left looks better." "Ivy, let me tell you, you can't spoil a man. You have to keep him on his toes, otherwise it won't be any fun once they have you." As she was speaking, her phone lit up. It seemed to be her family's bodyguard calling. She decisively hung up and raised an eyebrow at me smugly. She was certain that the person would call back. I chuckled, realizing that every couple has their own way of dealing with each other. Alan often complains that I don't show enough affection to him. Even when we tricked Mrs. Booth, Alan never pressured me to conceive quickly or engage in any pretense. He has always respected my wishes. When we got back home, Alan rushed over upon hearing my voice. Seeing the gift I bought for him, he was overjoyed that he looked at himself in the mirror and even posted on Instagram. On our wedding day, the atmosphere was grand with people coming and going. Mrs. Booth kept boasting to everyone that she was soon going to have a grandson. Their friends smiled politely, knowing that their sons didn't even have a partner. Mrs. Booth was pleased with herself, and even her attitude towards me improved significantly. The music started playing. I was wearing a wedding dress, walking towards Alan with David leading the way. At the end of the long red carpet stood the love of my youth. He was wearing a black suit and smiled gently at me. The officiant finished the vows. "I do. I do." We exchanged rings, and Alan's hands were shaking. I looked at him earnestly and whispered in his ear, "Husband, actually, I've liked you since a long time ago." Tears welled up in Alan's eyes, and he passionately kissed me. The sunlight shone on the newlyweds, blessing them with warmth.